our best trips ever. What?
I don't know if they're,
Seal.
Okay.
I'll follow up tomorrow.
Princess, where you starting from?
Seal.
Okay, starting. It's a great trip.
All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. This is the meeting of the Boca Raton Airport Authority on Wednesday, June 15th. Just to remind everybody, we are being recorded. So we'll start off.
I need mine. Yes. No problem.
We'll start off with the roll call. Scott?
Mr. Now,
Here.
Mr. Tucker,
Present.
Mr. Noble,
Here.
Ms. Budd, Mr. Fogel, here, Mr. Folden,
Here.
and Mr. Pollock.
Okay, we have 4 members here, so that constitutes a quorum. Is that correct? Not counting Jean. Jean, welcome. Next item is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of May 18th, and I'm looking for a motion for approval of the May 18th minutes.
So moved.
In your package, Bob?
Second.
Okay, Randy, second. Any questions, comments, edits? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thanks, Jean. Agenda changes. Ms. Ben, are there any agenda changes?
No, sir.
Okay. Overview of the bylaws regarding the election of officers, and Ms. Amy Petrick will give us an overview of the authority bylaws, rules of order related to the elections, our annual elections. Thank you. Amy?
So section 3.03B of the bylaws provides for the terms and election of officers. The officers for this board, obviously, is the chair, the vice chair, and then the secretary treasurer. At each board officer serves for a single year term and can serve 2 consecutive years. They cannot serve more than 2 consecutive years. And so all 3 of those officers need to be elected tonight. Because you are kind of thin on your quorum, you have 4 people, and the folks that are on the phone who are allowed to attend by telephone, but unless they are attending telephonically because of a major medical condition, they cannot vote. My suggestion would be that you take up each office one by one and open the floor to nominations, and then vote on each office and then move to the next office. And that way, the chair will only have to pass the gavel in the event that he wants to make a nomination for whichever single office that he is attempting to address.
Okay.
So,
very good. So we'll first start off with the motion. Let's start with the chair, I guess. That's first on our list.
I'll nominate Mr. Now to continue in that role.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion to say, any other candidates? Anybody else want to nominate anyone else? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries for the chair. Next up is the vice chair position. Currently held by Bob Tucker.
I'll
Yep.
nominate Mr. Tucker to continue in that role.
Okay,
I'll second that.
second by Mitch. Any other nominations? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries, Bob. Next is secretary treasurer, currently held by Randy Nobles.
I would nominate Randy
Okay,
in that position.
Second.
all right, I have a motion, a second. Any other candidates for secretary treasurer? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll continue on for another year in accordance with the bylaws. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Next is public requests. If any member of the public wishes to provide a comment on any item, the time to do so is now. Please complete a public comment card identifying the item upon which you wish to be heard and provide it to Scott. The public comment cards are located in the back of the room. Each member of the public wishing to comment will be provided with 5 minutes to do so. The chair reserves the right to move the public comment opportunity on a specific agenda item to the point in the agenda when that item is to be considered and/or to extend the allotted time per speaker. So, Scott, do we have any cards?
No,
To
sir.
speak, okay. Consent agenda. Ms. Bennett, any items on the consent agenda?
No, sir.
Okay. Any federal, state, or municipal input?
None.
Okay. All right, next item is the financial report, and Data Stewart is here. And Secretary Treasurer Randy.
Yeah. Any comments? No, other than,
We are, June is our ninth month of our fiscal year, so,
right.
staff is starting to, work on the budget for, next year already, which is,
October.
starts October 1. So.
Yeah. Right. Okay, with that, Jada Stewart.
Chair and Secretary Treasurer, Jada Stewart, Accounting Manager. In your package is the financial report through May 31st, 2022. As you can see, operating revenues year-to-date are approximately $4.5 million, and operating expenses year-to-date are approximately $2.3 million. Net income before depreciation is approximately $2.2 million. Overall revenues are 12.9% above budget year-to-date, primarily due to the seasonal nature of fuel flowage and custom revenues. Expenses are down approximately 30% to budget year-to-date due to expenses incurred but not yet received. Looking forward to year-end, the Airport Authority will see an increase in revenues due to the recently amended and restated Atlantic Aviation lease and an increase in fuel prices. Based on a survey gathered by our staff, signature and Atlantic fuel prices range from $7.74 to $8.09 per gallon. The summer season for the airport is projected to be slow, but we await this season's light traffic yield. As we all know, hurricane season is amongst us and will affect operational expenses in which the airport has already budgeted for. On behalf of the airport management and Secretary Treasurer, we respectfully present the 2022 financial report to the airport.
Thank you, Jade. Let's do we have a motion to approve the May financial reports?
Motion to approve.
Mitch, and second from Bob. Okay, any questions of Jada or comments related to the report? So yes, the fuel price increases are hitting here too as well, I'll say. Okay. Any other comments or questions? So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we accept the financial report. Thank you, Jada. Next item is number 9, tenant reports and requests, Premier Aviation of Boca Raton, Phase 3 development. So, Ms. Bennett, I'll turn it over to you to introduce this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I forwarded this information to you yesterday with the updates that were added in, we've just heard from Premier that they did not receive our counterproposal that we issued in on Monday. Is that correct, Ms. Patrick? So just a brief overview of what we have been talking about, as the board will recall, there was a permit deadline that occurred in March of this year. At that March meeting, Premier approached the board about a 6-month extension of that deadline for obtaining those permits. The board had discussions about parameters by which we would offer that 6-month extension and through an amendment process. Since that time, we have met with Premier, and the board has continued to grant those 30-day extensions for the last 3 months on the notice of breach regarding the missed permit deadline. We have had several back and forth conversations that are detailed in the background memo. Sort of the memo just builds on, as new developments occur. The latest development or the latest proposal that was presented by Premier, I'm sorry, I gave mine away. Sorry, Amy. Thank you. Is summarized as rent payment for Phase 3 building, subject, of course, of these ongoing discussions. That's correct. That is on the last page of the memo. That is the most recent information that we had received from Premier on Friday, and our response is also articulated here. The rent payment for the Phase 3 building
Premier has proposed as of last Friday, commencing in September of 2023. As you may remember, that is when the building deadline, the certificate of occupancy requirement is effective. They also propose to increase the rent by 2% per year through the initial term of the lease, and they have added a four option periods of 5 years for a total of 20 years at the end of the term. According to Premier, that rent is based on a net rent of $26 a square foot. The original proposal or the original discussions based on what Premier had presented at the time were a rent of $42 a square foot. And we had discussed with Premier that our preference would be to have a rent per square foot that was more reflective of the actual market, rather than a rent that was either artificially high or artificially low. So I understand that they did work with Mr. O'Donnell with Avis & Young, who's here today, to get a better sense of that rate per square foot for the market for Class B in the Boca Raton submarket. And in the materials I forwarded to you yesterday, that data, that presentation is presented. Premier was using a net rent of $26 a square foot for the basis of their revised proposal to us for the 50,000 square foot building, and that's based on the prevailing rate, according to Premier's representations to us, of the rent at the research park, the Florida Atlantic University Research Park. As you know, that's a different ball of wax. It's a different mandate than what we have here at the airport, and so we responded to Premier that our requirement based on, our mandate is for fair market value. And so to make sure that we are fair, we also survey current rents at the airport for both Atlantic Aviation and Premier, as well as Premier subtenant Signature Flight Support, which is at that $36 a square foot. So Avis & Young got it right. So we did our math based on that $36 a square foot, which we believe is representative of the Class B market as presented by Avis & Young. And we followed that same structure that we had used with Premier in response to Premier's original proposal, basing our calculations on an occupancy rate of 50%. Excuse me, Bill? I'm sorry, there's a public meeting taking place. Thank you, Bill. We had used the Premier's representation regarding occupancy rates of 50% per year, 75 for year one, 75% in year two, and 90% in year three. We just accepted that. We discussed it with our appraiser, and he felt they were a little bit low, but again, acknowledging, I think we've all acknowledged, this building will not, in fact, be built and CO'd in September of 2023. So we took the 50%, 75%, and the 90% as had been presented by Premier and did our calculation. And so what we countered to Premier on Monday was the following: commenced rent payment of $45,000, which is based on 50% of the $90,000, which would be the basis of, based on that $36 a square foot. $67,500 September, the first anniversary, September 1, 2024, and then $81,000 in years 3 and 4. So we're sort of holding steady with annual increases of 3% per year, consistent with escalation rates applied to similar uses. That is what we've done with the lease, all of the properties that we charge improvement rent on at Atlantic. And then, of course, no additional option periods. We did propose to Premier that discussions, we would be willing to entertain a discussion and a negotiation of an extension to the base, to the lease itself, but it would require a recalculation of the rent, obviously, on the entire parcel. These are not separate parcels. These are just sort of construction timelines on the 15-acre parcel, and that we would have to follow a similar methodology as what we've done with other leases that have been extended here at the airport. So unfortunately, that correspondence was sent by Ms. Petrick on Monday midday, and Mr. Hashemi and Mr. Dubasar just indicated to us at the start of this meeting that they had not received that proposal. So with that, Don't know, have anything further that you'd like to add that I might have missed?
No, I mean, at the conclusion of the counter proposal, we requested that Premier indicate whether they wanted to proceed with presenting their proposal to the board for consideration, even though the staff would be recommending denial, or whether they would like to proceed in discussing settlement along the terms of the counter proposal. So they have not had a chance to tell us their position. This may be an appropriate time, if they're ready, to indicate to us whether they want to continue talking or present to you what they have offered that staff has indicated they would recommend a denial on.
Okay, yes, Scott, hang on.
Mr. Now, just for the record, Miss Bud was on, and it appears she just dropped off.
If you would, since we're being recorded at the podium there, and introduce yourself again. We appreciate that.
Good evening. As you may recall, my name is Howard Dubasar. I represent Premier, and I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. We had a major meltdown at our firm IT-wise at the beginning of the week. We should probably explain why we didn't see that until we got here. So I think the question to me is whether we want to proceed anyway, and the answer is yes. As a young lawyer, I was told when the judge says no, that's when your job begins. So let's take a crack at discussing this. Number one, just as an update, I spoke to Bonnie Miskel's firm about the status of how they're proceeding on getting site plan approval and permits. They're down to one issue. I understand that Bonnie is going to be speaking directly with the traffic person who they have to deal with on that next week. There's some sort of misunderstanding, they believe, on the part of the city of Boca Raton. So everything is proceeding with all deliberate speed and diligence, and, we remain positive that piece will be dealt with, and Premier remains committed to doing its construction. With respect to what's being discussed here, first of all, let me thank both Amy and Clara for giving us a couple of meetings, which were semi-productive, obviously not enough to get us all the way there. Regardless of where we wind up, we're going to put on a presentation. Mr. Hashemi has a PowerPoint that he wants to put on with a little more information than you have in your packets already. And I've got copies of that, just in case it's hard to see on the screen. And Keith O'Donnell is here to answer any questions about what's going on in the real estate market, talk about comps and that kind of thing, to the extent you all have questions. At the end of the day, though, having just looked at this counter proposal, the real issue is not what the number is in terms of the market rent, because we can disagree on that. We could probably even use your number. The real issue is the legal issue. And that is, there is a difference of opinion between me and Amy over how you will get back out of the percentage rents here. The percentage rent, if we were going with what the lease terms are, is based on the gross rent revenue. And there's a list of things that you would back out from that, the things you would expect, such as common area maintenance, taxes, and that kind of thing. But I'm glad I brought the lease with me today. It also says you would deduct from that the cost of the lessee's build out of sublessee space within the restaurant and or office building, plus broker's commissions, divided by the number of years contained within the initial term of sublease. And also, broker's commissions and tenant improvements. So once you deduct those, if you look at the lower numbers on the spectrum, almost to the highest numbers on the spectrum, there would be 0% rent pay. So on the meetings I've come to, I've heard this word loud and clear, and I've read what the FAA has had to say. And you guys need to get money, and you need to get value out of this building. And if the formula results in a no payment of percentage rent, that doesn't help anybody here. It doesn't help Premier, it doesn't help this board with what the FAA requires, and it doesn't make business sense. So I want you to focus very carefully on the portions of the presentation that will show you what the effect is of deducting these items. Again, there's a difference of opinion legally. I can see Mr. Fogel's ears moving over there as a transaction lawyer who's going to want to take a look at the lease himself. But at the end of the day, when you look at the pro formas, we're offering more than you would otherwise get under the lease. And that's in recognition of two things. One, what the FAA wants and requires here, which means that's what you want and require. And secondly, because of the request for the 4 or 5 year options. So we realized we had to come in over and above what would be fair under the circumstances, and that's why we couldn't give a low ball proposal. So with that in mind, I'd ask that you keep an open mind, take a look at Mr. Hashemi's presentation. He's going to walk you through not only the rental issues, but the performance. And then, as I said, I'll circulate to all of you a hard copy of that to the extent you can't read the numbers up on the screen.
Sorry. Hi.
Everyone,
Hello.
Hey.
Hamid Hashemi, 21 Compass Isle. Give me one moment to connect my presentation.
Sure.
Got more.
Okay.
Found the Holy Grail. Put it in there.
Oh, looking for it.
Thank you.
It's got a little bit more than that. It's
Recycle. Thank you.
That's the microphone.
Okay.
This is the conference room.
Have that reference.
Our legend.
You good?
Here, have it on that, drive.
Yeah, let me throw this, okay, just make sure. Let me give you a new one. Let's try it one more time.
Oh,
There you go. I'll send you this one.
Okay.
All right. All right. Well, thank you again for your time. Just want to walk you through really quickly through what our proposal is. You have a copy of it in your hand, but I want to focus back on what the language of the lease does, just for 1 minute. This is a portion of the lease that talks to how you arrive at the percentage rent. And I have it blown up here, and we can do it together. Instead, for the term, we're supposed to pay 5% of gross rental revenue, defined term. The term gross rental revenue shall not include reimbursement of lessee for real estate or personal property taxes paid by lessee for any sublessee space, sales tax, use tax, additional taxes or other taxes imposed upon sublessee, base rent, or use or occupancy of the sublease space. Interest, service charges, and collection fees charged on delinquent payments by a sublessee. The cost of lessee's build-out of sublessee space within the restaurant and/or office building, plus broker commissions divided by the number of years contained within the initial term of the sublease. Common area maintenance charges, expenses, and other similar factors. This language, look, I really like to hear everybody's opinion what this language says. It is very clear that we get to deduct reimbursement for taxes, for insurance, for any other common area charges, and deduct for cost of improvements that we're making into the space, amortize over the remaining term of the lease, and the commission that we pay to the brokers in order to secure those tenants. That's what the language of the lease does right now. In order to arrive at the rental revenue here, we built a model to calculate these numbers. We went to Avis & Young, we engaged Mr. O'Donnell to do a study of the market and tell us what the office rents for a Class B office would be. And you have a copy of his report. Basically, the office market, I'll jump right to the end numbers that we're all talking about. It says the office rent for Class B on the average is about $36 a foot. But that number includes $12 to $15 of common area charges and taxes. So if you take that $36 and deduct $12 to $15 from it, you're in the very low 20s. And we're talking about anywhere from $21 to $22. Then there is another chart in here that talks about rents at the research park. If you take a look at these numbers, it's $27, $10 to $12 of common area charge. So the net rent, in order to build the model, you have to take the base rent, add the common area charges that you collect from the landlord, from the tenant, and deduct it as an expense. So for the purpose of building the model, again, if you look at the top of the market, it's about $21 to $22. If figured the rent here should be about $25 to $26, higher than the market, it's a brand new building, plus the extras that any tenant would pay. So that would bring it up to gross rent of, call it, 36 to, actually at this number, it would come out to about $38 to $40 a foot. We use a common area charge of $8 and $6 for, that $6 will be charged back to the tenant, because you can't charge everything back to the tenant. And the taxes are 5%. We assume that 50% occupancy during the first year, 75% the second year, and 85% third year thereafter. Basically, any tenant that you, you all have rented offices, especially in this environment, you have to, when you first open an office building, you're giving tenants a lot of free rent. So the first guy's coming in, on the average, again, Mr. O'Donnell's here, he can answer any questions, what the market rents are, what the market concessions are. On the average, that number runs about 12 months of free rent. We factor that in our model, we built that number into it. Brokerage fee, typically on office leases is 6% of the rent for the term of the lease, not to exceed 10 years. If you do a 20-year lease, you don't pay the brokers, 6% of 20 years. You basically limit it at 10%. That's customary for office space. And the tenant TI is the tenant build out, roughly about $182 a foot, which is a number that I got from the contractor that we've engaged to work on this project. We allow 3% management fee and 5% will be going to BRAA. So if you look at those numbers, basically using the same assumptions, using the occupancy rate that's on top is 50%, 75%, going to 85%, rent at $26, and the operating expenses are the numbers that I mentioned to you. If you do the math, again, if you look at the revenue side of it, is what you collect is the base rent, plus the CAM charges and taxes that you collect from the tenants. Then you look at the expense side of it is the taxes that you pay, common area charges that you pay. And there are two lines there, which is cost of lease build-out, it's in the box, and the broker commission. So I've done this both ways. So we're going to look at the scenario where the way we're looking at the lease and what the language of the lease is. If you do the math according to this, there will be no percentage rent due to airport authority. Now, if we assume that we waive the commission and the TI deduction, and use the same exact assumptions, we arrive at a base rent, the percentage rent that ranges from $8,000 to $35,000 in year 2035. If you look at the bottom part of it, it adds up to $307,000 in rent. I'm sorry, I can get a little water. So even if we leave the commission and the build out, the rent that would be, the percentage rent that would be due to the airport authority, again, it ranges anywhere from $8,000 to $35,000 a year. So now, I've even gone back today, I did some sensitivity on some of these numbers. And let me start with this first. So as you recall, we engaged the airport authority engaged when we were looking to renew the lease, exercising our option. Airport authority engaged an appraiser, and so did we, and the two didn't come to agreement, we went to the third one. This is right out of the appraisal, the report that the airport authority appraiser did. If you look at that paragraph, this is their interpretation of the lease. It's a third-party interpretation. This is your appraiser. Basically says the percentage rent provision of the master lease provides for Premier to pay the BRAA additional 5% of the adjusted gross rent received from non-aeronautical tenants, in addition to the land rent required under the master lease. The percentage rent is calculated based on the adjusted gross rent received, which is equal to gross rent minus deduction for annual operating expenses and common area maintenance, as well as amortized leasing commission and construction development costs. This is your appraisal. This is a page out of our appraisal report. It says the same thing, basically. The percentage rent payment are offset in initial years of the sublease by an annual deduction of the fees, development leasing costs amortized over the subtenant lease term. Two independent appraisers read the lease exactly the same way that we do. And this is the third appraisal that we appointed, which responded to a request about a percentage rent. Basically, all it's saying is that, he evaluated both reports, and he posed the question whether the 5% should be deducted. I mean, the commission and the TI should be deducted or not. And there's a response from Ms. Petrick. By the way, we've been using the same calculation from the day we opened the restaurant space. We have been deducting commission, we've been deducting the TI cost 7 years now. So, I went back today, again, we came here to hopefully reach a settlement. What we're proposing to pay is $50,000 a year in rent, with escalation of 2% a year, starting September of next year, whether the building is open or not. No matter how you look at it, that number is greater than any number you can imagine. The numbers that you're using, the $26 or $36 that you're using, those are gross numbers. We're entitled, nobody can dispute that we get to deduct the operating expenses and CAM charges and taxes. I don't think that's in dispute, is it? I don't think that is. So even if I leave those, even if we leave out the commission and taxes, we're still operating greater than that. Now, you say occupancy is, it should be 90%. I went back and I did the occupancy at 90%, which is right over here, and I bumped up the rent, base rent to $30 a foot. Under this scenario, if we look at it with the deductions, we still don't owe anything to the airport authority. Same scenario, at 90% occupancy and $30 a foot in rent, what we'll owe the airport is $457,000, which we're offering $700,000 over the term. It's still substantially greater. If I go to $35 a foot, if I leave the deductions in, we owe you $69,000 versus $700,000 that we have on the table. And if I take those deductions out, it's at $582,000, and we're offering $700,000. No matter how you look at it, we're offering more. And what we're asking in exchange is, look, I firmly believe, I have no doubt in my mind, I'm prepared to spend this money, give it to you, or use an alternative method to prove my case over here. But I'd rather have this settlement. But if I do it, I need additional extension. And by the way, I'm not asking for extension just for this property. I'm asking for extension for the entire property, the same lease. Because when I exercised the option, we went to fair market rent. And I'm saying that that's the fair market rent for all parcels, not just for one piece or the other. I'm asking and offering the same methodology that we have. It's a fair market rent. It's adjusted to fair market rent. Just grant me 4 additional options. You've done it for Boca Aviation many, many times. Boca Aviation the initial lease was in 1984 for 25 years. They got 3 5-year options. They got another 5-year option. Their options extend all the way up to here. We're in year 55, I think, on that lease. We're not asking you to do something for us that you haven't done before. And we have Mr. O'Donnell here. If you want to ask any questions about the rents, market rents, I'd love for him to.
Great, thank you. I'll look to Clara and Amy for any comments, or Scott, I'm sorry.
Ms. Budd has rejoined the meeting telephonically.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Any comments or rebuttal, whatever you want to?
Well,
Howard.
So there's been a lot of focus on the percent rent. I can address with you how your staff and your council interprets that, just so that you understand the crux of that issue. However, I don't want for there to be too much confusion about focusing on the percent rent issue and not considering the other aspects of the proposal and the counter proposal, one of which is the escalator. Mr. Hashemi is offering 2%. The standard that has been set for current leases is 3%. So that's the first issue. Then the second issue has to do with the 4 extensions. The 4 extensions is a significant issue from an FAA compliance perspective, because you are encumbering the property beyond the existing lease term. And typically when you do that, here in the 6 years that I've been your counsel, you have looked to rectify your income stream to bring it to fair market, because you are talking predominantly about non-aeronautical property in this instance. You've got one phase that is aeronautical, and then you have 2 that are non-aeronautical. And so if you are going to encumber the 2 non-aeronautical portions of this single leasehold for a significant amount of time, you need to bring them into fair market. And so that is the context in which we have evaluated the proposal, and that's
an FAA expectation.
Yes, it is. The
State.
FAA has made it very clear that they are looking at this particular lease carefully because of the extensions that have been granted and the concern about us meeting the FAA obligation to receive fair market value for non-aeronautical uses. And so, from a practical perspective, there's no use saying yes to something that the FAA is unlikely to approve. So that is a big piece of our consideration in evaluating the proposal and crafting the counter proposal. But in the interest of completion of the conversation with respect to the percentage rent, the issue with how this reads, I kind of very informally liken it to when you do your taxes, you have deductions that are above the line and below the line, if that makes sense. The way that the percent rent works is you get 5% of what constitutes gross rental revenue. And gross rental revenue is defined as revenue received from each sublessee occupying space within the restaurant and or office building when constructed and operated on the premises. So you're talking about a percent of money you've received from the sublessee. And out of that amount of what fits within the definition of gross rental revenue, the lease says gross rental revenue does not include reimbursements for tax, interest, service charge, collection fees, costs for build out of space, broker's commission, common area maintenance charges, expenses, and other similar pass-throughs collected from the sublessee. So you have a pot of money you've received from the sublessee, some of which may have been received by you in reimbursement for certain kinds of expenses. If you have received money from the sublessee to reimburse you for certain kinds of expenses, you do not use that in determining the gross rental revenue from which you take the 5%. That is a very different thing than defining the 5%, defining the gross rental revenue, figuring out what 5% of that is, and then taking it off below the line as a net deduction. Elsewhere in the lease, it says this is a triple net lease. So the percent rent is not structured in a way where you make the initial percent calculation and then you take deductions after the fact. That's not how it reads. There is no calculation language in the definition that indicates that's how the math is organized.
So you don't agree with this language that's right here?
This is the language, and it's defining gross rental revenue, which is the revenue you start with. This is a piece of what the lease says. It's not the full thing.
True.
And so gross rental revenue is defined as revenue received from the sublessee, and you do not include in revenues received from the sublessee things that you have received from the sublessee in reimbursement for this, and this. So, if they received from the sublessee property taxes, or service charges, or collection fees, or build out, then
they can take that out of the gross rental revenue from which they take the 5%, but they can't define the 5%, calculate that number, and then net out from that things they have paid, not that the sublessee has paid, but they, as the tenant, have paid. That's not how the math is written. Now, that may not be what they think it ought to say, but that is how the lease is structured. It is a triple net lease. It is not built the way that Mr. Hashemi and Mr. Dubasar have suggested. It's not a model of clarity. I mean, nobody is saying that, but there is no calculation language that says you take what the lessee has given you, you figure out 5%, and then anything you've spent, you take out of that number. And that's how they've been figuring out the math, which is not indicated under any interpretation of the language that's here, clear or not.
Mr. Hashemi?
So, two things. So you're pointing to two facts, which is deduction of these expenses, which is, this is language that's clear as it gets. Your appraiser, our appraiser, anybody that's looked at this lease, Mr. O'Donnell, I've shown this to 10 other people. We can go back through this whole lease. It's a gross rental revenue. You get to deduct all those expenses. The assumption that you don't include a commission, if you interpret it the way Ms. Petrick is interpreting it, you have to assume that a tenant is paying me commission. It never happens. It's asking you to deduct a commission or TI expenses. A tenant never pays for those expenses. I have never seen a tenant pay a landlord commission. So to interpret it that way, I think it's wrong. Secondly, when we talk about the deduction, we have never taken these deductions after calculating 5%. If you look at this model that we sent you, and throughout the 7 years that we've done it consistently the same way. You look at the cost of lessee's build out and broker's commission, they're in deduction to arrive at 5%. We did not take it out of the 5%. The 5%, again, this is, you have your income on the top side. These are the expenses that we include as expenses. We arrive at a net income, and then you take 5% off it. We're not taking out of your 5%. We're deducting like any other expense, just as the lease is saying it. Never done it in the past, never proposed it this way. I mean, besides, even if you leave those numbers out, we're still offering more than what the numbers would be. I think if you want to question whether $25, $26, $30, $35 are the right numbers or not, Mr. O'Donnell's here. He can talk to the numbers.
Howard?
The only other thing that I want to make clear is because, as I've indicated for you, the context that is important to us has to do with these extensions. The way that the appraisals were done when Premier decided to invoke the renewal, we went through that appraisal process. For Phase 3 and Phase 2, the appraiser who was kind of the tiebreaker, if you will, articulated a land rent. Now, this isn't the percent rent, it is a land rent, but articulated a land rent for Phase 2 and Phase 3 of $8 a square foot. So it's important for you to understand how far you are from fair market value for this land when thinking about whether or not you would give somebody a 20-year extension based on the lease as it is configured. And the final thing that I would say is, the counter proposal of, that is in my email with Monday, there were a lot of premises and assumptions that were given to us that we accepted at face value, that we may not have accepted at face value. The numbers that we identified here, the intent was to settle the interpretive dispute. And so you will see in here, we're not asking, let's articulate numbers and then apply the disputed interpretation. What we're saying is, let's pick some flat numbers and resolve the interpretive dispute and no longer apply the language that we don't agree about. So the idea that you accept a bunch of assumptions, you accept a bunch of numbers that may not apply to your instance, and then apply the disputed interpretation on top of it, it's more, and cure the existing breach
and give them 20 more years, quite frankly, it's almost gratuitous, the amount of benefit to Premier compared to the level of consideration that's being offered. And so from a compliance perspective, that's concerning. And so it shouldn't be confused that these numbers that were initially talked about, the 45,000, the 67,500, and the 81,000, that those numbers are intended to be considered under the rubric of the old lease language. They're intended to replace the old lease language. That was what the counter proposal was. So I don't want for that to be too confused.
And if I may, with regard to the term of the lease, this was a 50-year lease with the 3 5-year options that were exercised last year. So it was initially established as a 50-year lease. So what is being asked is for an additional 20 years, making it a total combined 70-year lease with basically, in consideration for rent for a building requirement that exists within the leasehold.
70-year lease or 75 years?
It was 50 and they're asking for 20.
Wasn't there 3 already built in?
The 3.
50 included, because 35 plus 15 is.
Correct, yes, but they're at the tenant's option, so it's effectively, and they've already exercised those, so they're about approximately 28 years currently remaining in the lease. So there's already a 28-year lease, remaining. 22 years have already expired. This is a requirement that was built in the lease 22 years ago, has yet to be complied with. And what we have been working on, as you know, for the last 6 years is trying to cure that issue with Premier collaboratively. But there was never any discussion at any point until the last 2 meetings that we've had where this notion of an extension of 20 years being part of that conversation. You'll recall that initially this centered around what had been characterized to us as a 4-month extension of the permit requirement that exists in the lease by virtue of those various extensions that you granted to those building deadlines. We offered 6 because we all knew you're not going to get a permit in 4 months. Why don't we do 6 so we don't have to come back to the board? And now that has sort of morphed into this requirement that Premier seems to have now of this 20-year extension. And even with that, we have proposed to Premier, we can entertain that discussion, but it would have to be with similar parameters as to what we've even just very recently done with another lease next door.
And clarifications of language, if I recall.
Pardon?
And clarifications of language, like.
Well, beyond that, it would have to be an amended and restated lease, and we have a template that we would start with.
Mr. Chen.
So in terms of the renewal that we're asking for, this lease is already being reset at market rent in 2035 and every 5 years thereafter. We've already engaged appraisal. They have already assessed what the rents would be in year 2036, 2041, 2046, all the way to the end of the lease. So this lease is going to reset to fair market rent. So when you give us, if you give us those additional options going forward, it'll be based on the fair market rent. We're not asking to give us anything below fair market rent.
But just to clear, staying on that, we as a board, 3 or 4 meetings ago, had somebody that was I believe it was counsel that was a national expert on FAA compliance that spoke to us. And we, as a board, agreed that was critical to us to be compliant with the FAA and not prove something that they're basically telling us that is not acceptable to them, particularly for a non-aeronautical space. So to me, that's kind of this extension is kind of a non-starter because we've all agreed that we're not going to do anything that's going to put us out of compliance with the FAA and them have to kick it back to us. So, if this is an issue that is going to be a stopper from Premier's perspective, I don't see us getting, talking about everything else, it doesn't matter.
So,
Yes, sir. Yeah, Mr. Chen.
I think the mandate that you showed us from FAA is that the rent has to be at market rent, right?
right? Correct? No, if you
Well, and
granted
that
option,
at least be in compliance with the,
right,
you know,
we
with
can
the
talk about
requirements
whether
of
we
the
can comply,
lease.
there's two separate issues,
Right.
right? If we're talking about the option period, the FAA is mandating that the FAA doesn't say you cannot renew the lease, so you gotta if you renew, it's gonna be market rent, correct? Am I right or wrong?
Now,
Well,
what
that's-
the FAA has said is that you have to get fair market value or fair market rent for non-aeronautical. And what you're proposing is that the board extend based on a premise that it's waiting 13 years before the land rent becomes fair market. And that is something that I think the FAA might have a problem with.
And those three option periods are included, they're contemplated in the existing lease
Correct.
agreement that the airport authority entered into with Premier Aviation in September of 2000, and that was approved by FAA as a right that they currently have. They don't have any right to anything beyond that. So any more that we would give them is not a right that they currently have.
Again,
Disagree. Is that what you're
the
saying?
renewal period of options that we're talking about, we're asking them to be at fair market rent, which is what the lease calls for. I don't think the FAA has any issues with that. If we're talking about the rent currently between now and then, we have a lease.
Right.
We have a lease that has a stated language.
Correct.
If we live to the words of the lease, we don't owe anything. I understand you have a mandate, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. I totally understand it, which is why we're here. You have a mandate to get fair market rent. But I have a lease with you. My lease doesn't say I have to pay fair market rent.
And your lease doesn't say that you get 20 extra years either.
No, so I'm asking, if I'm offering to pay you $700,000 between now and over the next 12, 13 years. In exchange, all I'm asking is, if by granting me those options, I'm not asking you to give me a lower than market rent. Those options are fair market rent. Boca Aviation's lease was 1984, multiple options that renewed. You just renewed it for another 40 years, 30 years with another 10-year option. Why can't, what's the difference?
Well, if I could
Why are we
address
treating
that.
different?
There is a difference. So the rent, first of all, it's not a renewal, it's a brand-new lease, and all they are getting is 30 years of a brand-new lease. They already have 11 years left to go. So the rent increases, as you'll recall, in 2 years. So they've already gotten a first round of increases because they are taking on responsibility for additional property that they don't currently have as a responsibility. So for the next 11 years, they've taken on property that we have had to maintain as the airport authority and spend time and money and effort to maintain and restore and operate those facilities. By redefining their leasehold, we got $148,000, approximately, if my memory serves, I don't have the document in front of me, of additional rent, plus we're no longer responsible for those areas, they are. The rent also resets from the current rent per square foot of somewhere in the 20 or 30 cents, whatever the number is, to current fair market value, and interestingly enough, it's fair market value that we determined in the appraisal process that Mr. Hashemi described earlier for the exercise of the options there. So that rent, their ground rent increases to that new fair market value, or fair market rental rate, for the aeronautical piece in 2 years. And the buildings revert, and all these other things happen, and they have to build $40 million minimum in improvements within the first 7 years in order to have gotten any of that extension. So if they start that process and don't finish within 7 years, they don't have a new lease. So it is different, and if that is the conversation that Mr. Hashemi would like to have with us, we would be willing to entertain that discussion. But as Ms. Petrick said, we're not required to extend any lease. We are required to apply sound business principles when we do.
Okay, let me turn, I'll give you one more chance, and I'm going to turn to the board and have our discussion. Please, go ahead.
But again, I want to be very clear that, we're not, Boca Aviation or Atlantic Aviation had the benefit of the last 55 years of paying below market rent, way below market rent. Way below what the rent at Boca Aviation or Signature is. So they've had the benefit of their lease. They have 2 years left to go, they're asking for extension. So that's not a long period of time, because the lease would have set to fair market rent anyway.
So they didn't really give up a whole lot. I have another 12 years left right now. That for me to reset the entire rent, it just doesn't make economic sense. I'm asking for the renewal at the fair market rent at that time. And if the issue is making investment, two things. You brought up the 2%, you want 3%, I'll give you 3%, and I'll commit to spend $15 million. They have 40 acres, they're spending $40 million. I have 15 acres, I'll spend $15 million.
Hey, Clara, Carol just called like you requested, call me on my cell because I'm now connected.
I'm giving you exactly the same thing, same benefits that both the aviation. I'll commit to spend $15 million on this property, additional, on top of what I'm spending right now.
Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Same terms that they got.
Mr. Nagy, mind if I add one second?
Yes, sir.
Just to bring it full circle.
Yes.
I'm not here to beat a dead horse, that's one of the lessons I learned. First of all, let me start with what Amy and I agree on. This lease is not exactly a fine example of good draft. There's multiple ambiguities in this lease. And let's just take a step back and remember why we started this process, because it's morphed into discussion of percentage rent being paid when there's no income and all of that. What started this was, there was a meeting about whether you could declare a default. And while you could claim that there was a breach because permits weren't obtained in time, and obviously the building won't be done in time, the problem with the lease is it was very clear. You can give a notice of breach, but you can't declare a default as long as Premier continues to work towards obtaining those approvals and goes into construction. We started talking about the fact, we actually suspended discussion of the issue at that meeting. We said, you know what, let's take a look. If we're going to do any sort of an extension here, we want to fix up this lease too. And I agreed with that. And we went back and said, we need to resolve this inability that this board will have to actually sue for a default, or claim default, because of the language in that breach provision. So what we did is we've now drafted this proposed 11th Amendment, which has probably been circulated to you. And we have changed that. We fixed it so that when you declare a default of a non-monetary, or a claim of breach of a non-monetary term, there's 30 days to fix that. And if you can't, unless it's because of some force majeure event, then you can hold them in default. With the exception of, as long as they continuously work towards getting these permit site plan approval and engage in the construction process, that stands on its own. That's why we started this process. Then we discussed, if we're going to do this, let's fix the business terms as well. It was very clear to us that you were going to get $0 in percentage rent. We said, fine, we're going to make a commitment of $50,000 a year, even though that isn't something you would get under the terms of the lease. And that's a consideration of the extension, it's towards the options, and now you also have a commitment of additional capital to be invested in the property on a consistent per acre basis with that of your other tenants. So I would ask that when you have this dialogue, you consider where we started, all of the issues that we've now been able to discuss, and where we've come. And we're confident that if the type of proposal that's being made tonight is approved, we're confident the FAA is going to approve it, because it makes solid sense given the limitations of this lease and given the value that is added, where value otherwise wouldn't be here. So with that, again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And can I just say from a procedural perspective, because this is new, this idea of the
Yeah.
$15 million, we did talk to them about the substantial investment that was part of the justification for Atlantic. And at that time, there was not an offer of a substantial investment, so this is a new thing. I think from a staff perspective, we would be looking for direction from you if you want us to pursue the development of a new lease based on the commitment of the additional $15 million and then some of the other things that we've been talking about, or whether you want us to go ahead and suspend conversation, issue the notice of breach, and move under the existing lease terms to the extent that they apply.
Right, thank you, appreciate it. Okay, let's have our board discussion, so Mitch?
Yeah, so there's a lot of moving parts to
Yeah.
this today. And I'm listening intently, trying to understand all of it. So this is what I come up with. And this is a summation, because we're experiencing this on a monthly basis, and maybe a little bit sprinkled in. You guys are living it every day. So to you, it's a lot more maybe clear than it is to us. Clearer than it is to us. How's that?
Yeah.
So here's what I got. Here's what I came up with. We got a lease. We have a few years left in it. They did exercise their rights to the extra 15 years. There's default in the lease because there was a building that was supposed to be built, and it wasn't built yet. It was supposed to be commenced at a certain time. It wasn't. There were delays in doing that. Some of them perhaps justifiable, some of them maybe not. I'm not offering any judgment on that right now. So when that building comes online, that's part one, so let's table that. Part two of that is the building was supposed to be done. When it gets done, there's going to be rent that's due in connection with that building. Question is, what is that rent? Okay, forget about any extensions, right? Or even beyond the original 35 years, what the fair market value is going to be. The building should have been built. There should be tenants in there. Tenants should be paying rent. Rent should be received. And from that rent, there should be some percentage rent that we are supposed to get. There's a distinction, there's a difference between what Mr. Hashemi's group, Premier, is interpreting as to what that rent ought to be versus what our council is saying that ought to be, based upon the fact that if there were a building anyway. So if there was a building there now, Mr. Hashemi is saying, hey, I could apply the terms of my lease, which is a contract, and it's enforceable theoretically for him, so that you would get nothing, because all these numbers would shake out. We're saying, no, that's not the case. We would get something. By the way, where is that building, Mr. Hashemi? It should have been built already. You're in default. And so he's saying, but I'm really not, because I couldn't do this, and the market this, and things changed that, and I get it, all right? We've been down this road a lot, you know that. So I'm not even talking about the extensions in there. I'm talking about just to make it simple for us to understand. Element one, is there a default? Should there have been a building? Is there justification for that? Should we give him notice for that? If we do, he gets 30 days to fix it. He's not going to be able probably to fix it in 30 days. It's been built already, but there's other intervening things like applying for permits and everything else, which he's been working on. So he has the obligation, which is without dispute, that he has to build a building, even if he doesn't get the extra time. So if we don't give him extra time, he's still got to build a building. And so if he builds a building, he theoretically is building it to collect rent, and then he's going to have to pay some rent. How much does he pay us? There's a bunch of numbers that are built into your assumptions over here, which, we can have a dialogue with, and I certainly respect the people like you, sir, who have contributed to this for your experience in the industry. And we can chat about that. But that, to me, is the first threshold. I can't get to anything else until I can get past that. All right, so we have to come up with an understanding about what that rent may be. But what I don't understand is if the obligation is to build anyway, what would we be getting to give the extensions? I haven't heard that. I don't see a carrot for the extensions. Now, I just heard one for $15 million, okay? That's
3%.
Okay, and 3%. All right, so the conversation is changed, and it's a better conversation. But,
We have a $10 million requirement now.
so they've
On
attended.
top of the 10, I offered 15 on top of the 10.
Oh, okay, well, thank you.
Okay, so if somebody's, we're obviously recording that, but, okay, so now it's a $25 million, of which 10 was a commitment anyway, now he's contributed. Okay, so that's, all right, fine, all right, that sweetens the nectar, so to speak, it's a little better, maybe a lot better. But, okay, so, to your point, counsel, with that in mind, you now understanding it's 15 on top of the 10, and the building of the building, if that's something that appeals to us, that's fine. But we also have to have an understanding about what the rent ought to be based upon what the lease terms are, and the opportunity that this presents to jettison ambiguous language and come up with firm language that is clearly understandable, that could look like percentage rent, it could look like fixed base rent, it could look like a hybrid of percentage rent and fixed base rent. Okay, that works for everybody. So that is my takeaway, gentlemen, and everybody listening, as to where we are at this point on this matter. So I just wanted to put that out there for you guys, because I was trying to follow the bouncing ball, and it was bouncing everywhere.
Yes, I'm gonna ask, Jean or Cheryl, if you have any comments, they're on the phone if you're able to. Okay, hearing none, we'll keep moving forward. So I guess, Randy, any comments, or Bob, either one?
I mean, just part of what Mitch had said, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
you know, I kind of thought I understood where, I mean, I thought I did understand where our position was coming into this. But then, you know, we get this, which is spreadsheets and third parties and you know, a lot new information that I think, you know, asking us to kind of digest this in, you know, 40 minutes is not really fair. So, and I agree with everything that Mitch says. So I just, you know, I think, you know, everything that Mitch said about building a building is spot on. It's just, I'm just not sure where our next step needs to be, other than, you know, extensions, amendments.
Right,
It just seems like we're feeling beat up.
Right. Bob?
Yeah, and thank you, Mitch, for distilling this down to using your fine legal skills to make this understandable to us. I was, like Randy, kind of overwhelmed and perplexed. It is amazing that they were able to fix the tech meltdown that happened on Monday and produce all this material in time, right? So, I question a couple of things, not only that, but just like the comparison with the research park. I mean, to me, they're two apples and oranges. The land that we're offering and operating over there, visibility to I-95, you know, thousands of people, I mean, it's very vastly different from this land that's right over here. That just doesn't seem equitable to me, and comparing two different things. So yes, I think it's important, to Randy's point, to digest some of this last minute information that's come in. It's a very important step that we're making, representing the public with this land that we're charged to manage, and also making sure that we're equitable and fair to all the other leaseholders at the airport, and making sure that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I had the same, I'm concerned about the other tenants we have and the FAA commentary. So, I mean, what I take is, you know, you had recommended that we deny or have legal counsel recommended denial and issuance of the notice of breach, but now we found out additional information because they didn't get this information, or they weren't able to access it. Maybe that's a better way to say it, Howard. And obviously, they've offered another $15 million on top to spend on that. So I guess I would look to Amy, or how to frame if you have a recommendation on a motion. It seems to me that we would need an extension. I'm concerned that this is like our third or fourth meeting, and we're not getting closer, you know, in the negotiations between our folks and our council and
So one thing I will say is, I think that the parties are making progress in defining where the sticky points are, and that is progress.
all right.
I don't want for it to seem like there's no kind of, diligent effort. I think on both sides, people are attempting to articulate what their deal breakers are, and that helps in figuring out a path.
We're still far apart.
We are still far, well, we were before we came in here.
Yeah, we'll-
And so to me, it sounds like the choice that you have to make is you either tell us, keep working along the lines of a new lease with the $15 million on top of the existing $10 million building obligation, bringing the lease terms up to operational terms, removing the disputed interpretive language, fixing the remedy and cure language that has, caused some of the problems that we're talking about. That would be consistent with your prior direction, and then with what Premier has offered here today. we can continue to work and see if there is room for discussion. Or if you feel like, what you've seen over the intervening months and years doesn't give you confidence and you'd rather us issue the notice of breach and continue under the existing lease, understanding that there is that outstanding interpretive issue, then we can do that. So keep working, issue the notice of breach. To me, those are your two options.
Scott?
And Mr. Chair, it seems Ms. Budd was having some technical problems. She is back on as a panelist now, and she did have her hand raised, so I'm not sure if you'd like to go to her for comment.
Okay, Cheryl, do you have any comments? I don't know if you were able to hear the last,
Yes, I was able to hear that the issue had been dropping in and out and the ability to chime in. So I didn't miss anything that was said. I did just want to make one observation, if I may, please. And that is, I think we need to be mindful here on which you will vote and I will not, is that we remember what Amy said, and that is, it is our primary responsibility is to fulfill our fiduciary responsibility in relation to the FAA. It is not to make things easy. It would be beneficial, certainly, to have a better defined, clearer language lease going forward. But even so, we still need to reach closure on the issues that are before us. And only, and again, I don't think we should waver very much from our board members into the airport. That is defined by the FAA. And, we have, Mitch, you have identified the three buckets, if you will, of kind of individual satellites on these issues that are moving. They are all real issues, and I agree with that, but the only one that is core to us and that we are voting on has to do with our ongoing fiduciary responsibility. So I will kind of leave it at that, but I think if you view it through that prism, this issue is not all that complicated. It's messy to get to agreement, but it's kind of clear. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl, appreciate that. I think we got the gist of that, right? So, you've heard what Amy said. Is there a desire to issue an extension with the caveats that were presented there in terms of progress that's been made tonight? I'm looking for a motion, I guess, or else we issue the breach of notice, I guess. Those are.
I'll ask a question.
I don't see us resolving it at this board meeting.
Okay.
I see that for sure, but.
Yeah, it's not getting resolved
Yeah.
tonight here. So if the threshold question is, are we prepared to issue the breach? Then it's that simple, like Charles said. But that doesn't, end the discussion. Right?
Right.
It may create some challenges and some heartburn and some difficulties. But I think it's in the best interest of our tenant and us as a board to come to a solution on this. My concern is, and I know you guys feel it too, because I've been on the board for a while now, and I just know that we've kind of had this chat a lot. It seems like it's been a considerable part of our lives for the last several years on the board. And I just think we need to come to some solution, and we need something to get us there. So I don't know if there's another way to do it, another vehicle that we can use to do it, other than to issue a notice. Because if we don't issue a notice, then we're back in another month. What happens then, guys? I mean, are we having the same conversation a month from now where, nothing's been resolved? And so I think there's been some progress tonight. I'm pleased that Mr. Hashemi has made the offer to add the percentage point, and which gets us closer to home, and the $15 million on top. I agree though, Bob, with you, and I'm no specialist in it, but clearly having, the real estate here is different than the real estate that's in some of the other comparable places or places that have been compared. And I know that the appraisals probably took some of that into consideration too, but, anyway, so, if we don't, let's open this up. If we do issue it, it's out. Okay? Pandora's box is open. Toothpaste is out of the tube. If we don't issue it, then what? We come back in another month and see what progress has been made in negotiations, and hopefully you come back and everybody's smiling and there's a bottle of champagne on the table. Okay? Alternatively, not. And then what? We basically kick the can down the road for 1 month.
Again.
I think that, again, from a staff perspective, our expectation would be that, as Patrick articulated earlier, there are specific points that we would like to see us address, with Premier and us address collaboratively together, and those are the issues of converting, if we're going to have these disputes about percentage of growth and whether it's $36 or 26 or 42, going to a flat rate, I think benefits everybody. That way, if they're highly successful, have 100% occupancy and have waiting lists, and they can charge $60 a square foot, then all of that benefit accrues exclusively to Premier, and that's wonderful. But it's beyond that. I think that was one calculation when we were just talking about rectifying the potential default that we think may happen with that building not being CO'd in August of 2023. But if we're talking about an extension of time, I'm sorry. If we're talking about an extension of time, then our expectation would be that, yes, we comply with the terms of the lease currently, but we have a new lease that there is an economic benefit. I can come to you, each of you, and show you that there is a net present value calculation on the entire leasehold that benefits the airport authority in lieu of waiting the 28 years, and then we get everything back, and then we do something different with it, or we RFP it out, or we operate it as an FBO, or do whatever that is in the best interest of the airport authority in 28 years. So that, when I think about lease extensions, that is the calculus that I have to do and present to you of, listen, this is the best deal we can get for the airport authority, not just today, but we think it's better than waiting 28 years because we're going to have all of these benefits in those intervening years. And that's a great deal rather than wait for 28 years. So that if Premier is willing to have a conversation along those lines, then I think we can be a lot more productive because the parameters will have been set by which we would do that.
Another observation too, and this came up with a comment that Mr. Hashemi made. We're thinking about this a lot in the terms of the building that's to be constructed, but he did also mention that the lease extension would be for all of the properties. Okay, so I haven't really heard, or that I can recall, much of an analysis about what happens with the other properties, with the other subtenants that would be part of this lease. All those leases, I did hear you say, are also percentage leases as well?
There is one lease, just to be abundantly clear.
Right, there's one lease. I understand.
There is a 15-acre parcel
right.
that was RFP'd out, and the winning proposal was presented by Premier Aviation, and that was the basis of obtaining a lease. That parcel was to have been developed in 3 separate phases. So when we talk about phases 1, 2, and 3, we're not talking about separate legal entities or assets that can be sold individually. There is one asset,
timing.
One leasehold, the construction timeline. Now, for phase 1, and by the way, the entire parcel is designated in our ALP as aviation to further confound the problem, which is why granting extensions and things like that, the FAA has said it's got to be based on the actual uses on the property, because the original uses for the non-aeronautical phases were to complement the FBO, to supplement and complement the FBO services. In other words, help the FBO be an FBO. It's hard to say that a mattress store helps an FBO. So we kind of corrected that, and with support and collaboration with Premier in those future option of when those options were exercised. So that corrects that per the existing lease. However, any new lease extension, of course, there's only one lease. It would have to account for an increase in rent or some other method, but it would have to address the entire leasehold. Because it's not a separate leasehold. Phase 3 is not a leasehold. It's a construction requirement that occurred 17 years ago.
I understand that. I guess my question or comment would have been, we're having a dialogue as, in a lot of ways, at least in my mind, was like rental income from the building, but it's rental income from every subtenant that would be there on the building. I don't know, you could ask him.
Mr. Chair, just like to point out that both Mr. Fulton and Ms. Budd have their hands raised. I'll leave it up to you if you'd like to go to.
You might have to go to the microphone. You need to speak as of, 1 second, Gene, and Cheryl, I'll get to you. We'll go comment here first.
I want to address the question about the percentage rent. I mean, correct, there's a master lease here. There's aviation portions of it that are different rents than the commercial portions of it, and they all get reset at the renewal. Every bit of it gets reset to fair market rent when I exercise the option. Then, in terms of percentages that are paid, those percentages are still remaining. I mean, the FBO pays percentage of their fuel, their car rental, everything. I pay 5% of the income that I receive, less the deductions, cab charges, et cetera, from mattress firm, restaurant, all those tenants. And it's set the same way. None of that is going to change. Now, all we're offering here is that instead of that percentage, we'll pay you this fixed amount, which addresses what your concern is. We don't have to sit here and argue about, does this get deducted, that doesn't get deducted. It simplifies the whole process.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Which is what you want.
Not in the business
That's a good thing, yeah.
of investing in property. No. That's what a fixed rent is attractive.
Right.
Because,
Takes the uncertainty out of it.
Right. And that's been the premise by which we've been kind of proposing, from the get-go, yes, absolutely. There's benefit to that, which is why we accepted those vacancy factors and all those rates as sort of as givens, absolutely.
I think in your evaluation, you should really hear from Mr. O'Donnell, because there's still a question whether we use the rent at the local part. I did not. I used the higher rent, which was the $36, less the cab charges and taxes. I grossed it up. In my calculation, I used the $36.
Well, that just takes us back to the dispute on the CAM discussion, right? So.
Right.
Even the cab charge, I took it out, I'm still paying you more than that. I can't use the calculation.
Not the point.
Yeah.
All right. Let me go to Gene first, Cheryl, since you had a little bit to talk, and then I'll come back to you, Cheryl. So, Gene.
Sure, thank you.
Just in review, once we agree upon a amount here, when does the payment start on this?
September of next year, 2023.
What has been proposed most recently by Premier is September 1, 2023.
Would be for whatever amount we agree upon here. Is that correct?
That is for the phase 3 requirement, correct? Yes.
All right, thank you. That's
correct.
And Cheryl?
Right, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you. Just one quick point. Again, what we need to keep in mind is the following. Two things resonate to me in all the things that were said this evening. One is a phrase used by Amy where she said that the presentations that were made to us thus far, and that was prior to the 15 million and the additional point, were, quote, gratuitously beneficial to Premier. Gratuitous.
Yeah,
We got the point.
You just cut out.
It looks like you're back on mute, Ms. Budd.
We're not hearing you, Cheryl.
Is she out of the country?
Still talking.
Yes, it's traveling, yes.
It's too bad.
How about this? Can you hear me?
We can right now, yep.
Okay, great. Sorry, I apologize for that. Yes, I am far, far away, in a land far, far away. What I was saying is I think there's really two phrases that we should keep in mind as you deliberate this. The first is a phrase that Amy used early on when talking about the presentations and the proposals that had been made thus far at the beginning of the meeting, meaning not counting the 15 million and the extra point that has been discussed at the end. is that those terms that were presented and were put up on the board for you to look at on the screen were, quote, gratuitously beneficial to Premier. Gratuitously beneficial to Premier, says our outside counsel. Now, just in closing comments a minute ago, Ms. Bennett says, what we need to hear, and I'm adding this, what we need to hear is have our general manager and our outside counsel say that they have worked and believed come to the best deal that can be made for the airport. That's what Clara said we need to get to, and I cannot agree more. So what we have is what walked in the door, gratuitously beneficial to Premier. Doesn't matter whether it's $36, $42, it doesn't matter, guys. On the whole, that deal was gratuitously beneficial, and we are nowhere near yet the best deal that can be made for the airport. And what I would propose, and I understand this is totally unofficial, I can't make a motion or whatever. If we believe, and the joint we, the royal we, that we can come to something that is the best deal for the airport, not just the best that these two parties can do in 30 days, then I say give them 30 more days. I don't know that that's possible. And I would just look for a nod from Clara, Amy. Can we get to the best deal for the airport in 30 days?
Well, I can only speak from our side of the table. We have a template that we can apply. I mean, we have a brand new lease we just did with Atlantic Aviation. So, I mean, I think that would probably be a good starting point. And I think we have a lot of work that was already done last year when the exercise of the options occurred. So there's already calculations there that were done for the aeronautical piece as well as the two non-aeronautical pieces. So we don't have to go through another process that we would have otherwise had to go through. So a lot of the groundwork, at least as far as I'm concerned, has already been laid that would give us a very good starting point.
And on a scale from 1 to 10, how far away are we from coming to that deal?
Well, our expectation
10 is very, very far away.
Well, as was articulated to Premier, unfortunately, they didn't. Maybe they'll have an opportunity to review the email that was presented, so that was sent on Monday. But we did forward that to all of you. I think what we said there is that for any discussion regarding an extension of the term, meaning those extra 20 years that they have now expressed as a need, would require a new lease. We have a new lease already. That was a great starting point. We spent quite a bit of time developing a new lease document. So there's a good starting point there. But it would require resetting of the rents within those earlier years, not waiting until 28 years from now, because otherwise, again, we can just let the term expire for 28 years, and we get the whole property
I actually
back.
do understand all that, but my question to you, Clara, is give me a number. 1 is yes, it's right around the corner, I think we can do it. And 10 is I don't see it. We've been trying for a long, long time. And I don't think it can be done in 30 days.
I think that question is better asked of Premier, because again, I think we have been clear on our end as far as what our sticking points would be, and it would have to be their willingness to acknowledge that these are matters that we hold fast on. So I think the question is better presented to Premier.
Then I so present to Premier, please.
If I can just offer just a couple of statements that I think might help contextualize. You know, the difference between what their proposal was and what our counter proposal was in respect to that first few years, it's not, the order of magnitude is not that far off. It was the 20 years and the lack of investment and the percent of escalation. Those were the places where we were not able to make progress. So tonight you've heard 3% is okay, 15 million on top of the 10 million is a commitment. So that is a significant resolution of a couple of the major stumbling blocks. You know, they're offering 50,000 as fair market rent beginning in September of 2023, and we were at 45,000, and then 67.5, and then 81,000. So you're only talking about in years 3 and 4, 30 grand off. Like, those are numbers that I would think that two parties wanting really hard to work towards could fix. Given the resolution of the percent escalation in the intervening years and then also the improvement, I will tell you, having just gone through the process with one of your tenants, that writing a new lease requires a lot of good faith and a lot of, negotiation in the details, and it takes a little bit of time. But if you could create a term sheet, like if I were sitting in mediation and one person was at 50 and one person was at 81, I would not say let's declare impasse, in a vacuum. So I don't know if that's helpful perspective.
Yeah, we're making progress. And you are sitting down together, or are you just trading emails?
No, we've met twice in person.
3 times, actually.
I would have one
That's right.
more comment, if that's all right, Howard, with you.
Sure.
Okay, and if you would introduce yourself, please, appreciate it. Thank you for the record.
Good evening, Keith O'Donnell, Avison Young, 2518 Cocoa Plum, have moved finally after 34 years, Broken Sound Club, so I'm enjoying it over there. And those of you most of you know me here, so, and as you know, I've been in the market for 40 years, and so Hamid and I go back, I don't know, 20, 30 years, and he asked me years ago to help him with the 4th and 5th project in Del Rey. It ground on longer than this, and it was not his fault. We ended up with a very successful project and poached 2 big tenants from Boca Raton and up to Delray Beach. But what I see here, let me give you a couple observations. One is that project in Delray Beach is one of maybe 4 or 5 office buildings that have been built in the past 10, 15, 20 years. The reason why the Arvada Park of Commerce has a PMD zoning, which I helped create, was after Office Depot, which was NCCI on steroids, for the size and the design, but we just couldn't see a horizon where office was there. So now there's multifamily, there's retail, there's hotel, there's other uses. And it's really difficult to pull off suburban office, whether it's B minus, B plus, and the reason why I think Hamid used the research park is there's a 2-story building there that same architect designed that, Modernizing Medicine occupied. Now there's another tenant that's there, and it's actually going very, very well. So don't you put up with 1-story stuff that's over that 2-story property over there that's been very successful. So what I see is a little bit of deal fatigue. So I'm brand new to this. So I don't know that much about the negotiations. I didn't get involved in dealing with the terms. I didn't look at the terms. I just observed the market. And I'll just tell you that if you have a developer that wants to do an office building, I mean, that's like golden. You just don't have that anywhere in this marketplace I can count on. I mean, I know of one that might be proposed at Town Center, and that's it. Just don't have office that comes along that, and it's really needed. It's hard to finance, it's hard to dig equity, you gotta have more than 30 years. And I'll just tell you that, from my perspective, if you can actually deliver that office here, I wish it was aviation, I may end up having some aviation tenants, but if you can deliver an office building in this park, I think it would be very successful. It's just a super hard lift to be able to put that together. And I can answer any questions if you have any, but that's just my 40 years of working in this marketplace, and you all know.
I appreciate the broader perspective, Randy?
Just a couple of quick questions for Amy. Cheryl brought up the gratuitous to Premier. My sense was a significant part of your weighting there, at least a portion of your weighting for that comment went towards the fact if you were to do the extensions.
That's right.
Correct?
That is.
So just,
Yeah.
we're taking that off the table, and so we take that away. So the other question I have is, the counter proposal, did that go out US mail or?
No, the proposals and the counter proposals have been exchanged via email.
So, I guess I'm feeling a little frustration in that, you know, we've been presented with this big deck that kind of just skipped over our counter proposal that somehow didn't get looked at. And I guess that's been a point of frustration in kind of talking through this.
Well, and I will tell you that this is the second time that an email from me has not been identified, and so in future, communications will be done differently.
Okay.
So, I mean, you have one more comment, and then I'm gonna try to get a motion here.
I had the information on Friday. And I said, let's schedule a talk, time to talk, and you can go get back to me. You never got back to me.
We did on Friday afternoon, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
That's the email you didn't get.
That, you know,
I'm sorry, on
back.
Monday afternoon. Right, but we did, we sent to Howard the proposal, that's how all the other proposals have been done, yeah.
All I'm saying is, it wasn't sent to me.
Yeah.
You had, you know, computer problem.
Yeah.
All you have to do is send a copy to me, because I asked you, because you and I talked.
I think we'll just send him certified mail from now on,
Yeah.
or carrier pigeon, but, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so, I'm looking for. Yeah, but it's a moot point at this point. So I'm looking for a motion, if somebody wants to make a motion, we have a recommendation for staff to do an extension, there is some movement toward each
Can I
other.
ask one question?
Yeah.
Of Howard and Hamid. Are you guys opposed to a brand new lease?
From my perspective, yeah, I mean, look how long it's taken us to deal with an amendment. I mean,
Yeah, but-
I'll have grandchildren by the time.
Yeah, you're a litigator, okay? With all due respect.
Litigated some of your things.
Exactly. Bullet grazed me.
Trying to go back.
I'll walk by. I think honestly, there's enough motivation to knock out, I mean, you could do a lease, granted, it's not uncomplicated, but you can get some progress done on a lease pretty quickly
Well, staff is not recommending proceeding with discussion
on a new lease.
that includes an extension unless it is a new lease.
Okay.
So if it has an extension in it, it needs to be a new lease.
Stated and amended and restated.
That's-
Without an extension, we're not gonna do it. Just be very clear.
No,
I don't
so-
wanna walk out of here with giving anybody false, you know, information.
So that's fair, so where I'm at, guys, is if we're gonna entertain the idea of an extension, and in consideration of the extension, we get the points that we're looking for, the additional $15 million, the 3%, and what, I don't really know that you covered everything with us, then that's a dialogue that should be had, and I'd be willing to, you know, push this off another month. However, there needs to be real progress that needs made. Otherwise, you know, we're just gonna have no faith in this process. And we've already have shaken and partially broken faith in the process. So, to your point, yeah, I mean, if we're gonna, we can't not do nothing. So we either have to say, okay, guys, we either have to give them, we either vote for a notice of default right now, a breach, or we basically say, in my mind, we'll give you 30 days, make it happen. Come back to us with something that really looks like it's gonna work, and take into consideration in that amended and restated lease, the extension of time that makes sense, for what the tenant is willing to give us in consideration.
I just want to address practical sides of it. I'm not an attorney, so if he does an amendment and restate it, we can do that. If we talk about doing a new lease, remember, I have a sublease with signature. I can't alter this master lease without their consent. Now you're bringing other parties to the table.
We dealt with exactly the same thing in Atlantic, where we were able to accommodate existing subleases. That can happen with an amended and restated lease. So
30 days, I don't know.
Yeah, it's done all the time, so it can certainly be done.
Can it be done legally?
Yeah, it will definitely be done legally, absolutely, and trust me, I mean, we're there. So they're gonna have their attorneys looking at it too, because of the investment that they've made in the project as well. But I think that, You know, I'm not naive. I think 30 days is, you know, incredibly ambitious. But I'd like to think.
Particularly this time of year with people off.
Yeah. Letter of intent? So you know what? So why don't we have our staff put together our term sheet about what we need to have? Maybe you've done this before, but maybe you do it in the bullet point style and send it out in 4 different ways to make sure that the Howard gets it, B gets it.
Copy me as well.
Okay, and then if you guys like it, like literally, this should not take long. I mean, if you're intent and you're in good intent to get it done, you just say what you want, and if you can live with it and you can't and not, you get on the phone, you knock it out, and I know it's oversimplification, but it's really not. You get the deal done, because you're losing us, okay? And that you don't want that to happen.
We're weary of the process.
Yeah.
Agreed. Just though, to clarify, I mean, we've heard, from the tenant that they're not gonna move forward without the extension.
Move forward in what way? To do what?
They won't negotiate without the negotiation including an extension.
So you won't build?
No, I will build.
You'll build?
I'll do what I'm supposed to do.
Okay, you'll follow with a commitment under the
I'm
lease?
not altering the percentage rent.
Okay, and then, so we then have an agreement that still lives relative to the rental. So we haven't really accomplished anything.
So then are we going to be able to meet by, you know, restating the lease? Are we gonna be able to meet what we feel is gonna be acceptable to the FAA if we know that an extension needs to be part of this?
Well, I mean, it would have to be, and the FAA is gonna look at it almost exclusive, not only for this, but they're gonna see what is the economic benefit.
Exactly.
In lieu of just letting the property come to terms. So that is going to be the mandate, is why do this? If we're entitled to, if it's nothing for the building, great, it's nothing for the building, but we're not required to give an extension. So whatever we're entitled to, we're already entitled to that now. So in order for us to extend it, what are we gonna get that's better than doing nothing? Like that, and that's what the haul is, that's what we have to come up with.
Well, and let me, just to state it differently, so the FAA telling us we have to get fair market for non-aeronautical, I think the FAA doesn't really care if the physical building is there or not, as much as they care that the rental stream begins.
Sure.
Consistent with what our initial obligation was. So if that is part of what we eventually accomplish, then that should satisfy the FAA, even if physical construction is delayed. And that was the initial premise.
Right. As it relates to the existing lease not being in default, but with
Correct.
any additional terms, that's a different negotiation.
Well, each piece of it
Right.
needs to have its own consideration from an FAA perspective. Why are you giving this? What are you getting in exchange for it for non-aeronautical? Because you have an obligation to be self-sufficient financially, and
Right.
that's part of the analysis.
And the $15 million that was presented from the gallery today, that's a great start. That is actually a very good place to start, because that is rationale for extending one of the same process we just went through with Atlantic Aviation, but there are other parts, including the financial aspect to the airport authority, beyond that $15 million additional in investment that they're proposing.
Yeah, the 15 million is just for capital investment, the 25 million. Can you articulate, oh, God, I guess, I don't want to get it. Right.
Right.
Okay.
15 million on top of that.
Right.
So what, I mean, can you, in 100 words or less, say what you think $25 million would go to? Oh, for him, because don't forget, I mean, the guys from Atlantic have to do the 40 million in 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to get 35 years to do the 15 million, you're going to get a similar kind of deal. So where?
In 7 years? No, that's not what I'm proposing.
No.
I'm not saying in the next 7 years.
No, understood. I'm saying, but there's an extension of 20 years.
Within the 28 years, all right? I mean.
If I don't
Otherwise, we
exercise,
just.
look, it's an option, right? If I don't exercise it, I don't have to spend it. I will spend that money the same way you're doing it for them.
Okay.
You're granting them a new lease, and they have to do it during the first 7 years.
Yes,
When you,
Hmm?
when they find it.
correct, yes.
I'm saying the same thing. I'll spend it, $15 million. If I exercise my option, I'm committing to you to spend $15 million.
So what the additional $15 million,
I don't over 5 years, I don't even need 7. Awesome. I don't know what else I can do.
That's really
I'm here to
great.
make
So what the
decisions,
15 million, to answer your question in fewer than 100 words, was what the 15 million, does on top of the 10 is allow for the conversation to happen. That is a rationale, a basis for starting a negotiation. That is not the end of the negotiation relative to the 20 years.
But I'm sorry, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Atlantic has to spend its $40 million in the first 7 years of the new
Right.
lease.
Or they get nothing.
Or they don't get the extra 10 years. Or do they have to spend 50 or they don't get the extra 10?
Right.
They have to spend the 40, period.
They have to spend the 40 in order to get the extension, the new lease that they got, beyond the 11 years that they currently have.
So they're doing it from year 1 to year 7, like starting now, yeah?
Correct. In fact, right, we've already met with their design team. They're looking at the permit process, et cetera.
So Mr. Hashemi just said he was not going to spend the $15 million in the first 5 or 7 years, that would be different than how Atlantic leases.
That is correct. So Atlantic's leases, they have to build $40 million in improvements within the first 7 years. If they build another $10 million within the first 15 years, they get another 10 years. So that's
I'm saying the
different.
same thing.
Okay.
Please understand, I'm not saying 7 years from today. I'm saying if I exercise those options, I'll agree to spend it in that first 5 years. If I don't spend it, you're getting.
Of the new option
In
period.
his mind, what I'm hearing Mr. Hashemi saying, in years 29 through 34
The deal.
from today,
That's
he
very
would
different
spend
than
it.
Atlantic.
Right, that is not the same deal.
I hear you. So obviously, here we are thinking we're talking about the same thing, and we aren't. So I think that,
That's why you need a term sheet, right?
yeah, we need to put this on paper, to have people look at it and read it and object to it or agree to it and sign off, and then go from that point to the next
So
point.
if I may, if logic prevails, okay, we're here having this conversation going on, almost 2 hours, because they need another 20-year extension in order to build the building. So if they're proposing to build $15 million more in 28 years from now, and they only have 20 years left then, I won't be here, hopefully, but in 28 years, will they then need more time, given that we are here now? They have 28 years currently.
I don't think you need to go there, because they can't exercise the option without that commitment. And there's ways to kind of strengthen that, which I'm sure your counsel can come up with. He looks crafty.
Because again, what we're saying, or we let it come to term, and in 28 years, we can redevelop it.
That is
or we can put it out for RFP for somebody else,
yeah.
or we can operate it,
Those are all options.
all vertiports,
Okay, but
so
if we
those are
choose,
the options.
if we choose to do that, aren't we back at square one, which I guess we can go to, like, ADR or something, or other than that, to determine what the interpretation of the lease and the payment of rent's going to be, because we feel it's one thing and he feels it's something else.
Well, I think the interpretation, as far as we're concerned, the 5%, what we're trying to do is establish a rental rate, and for us, whether it's 45,000 or 50 or even 75,000 is, I think what we were trying to accomplish was fixing it to a fixed rate so that there is no further interpretation.
Right.
That's, I think, is easily done.
Are you,
Right.
are you prepared to do it as a fixed rate without also getting the extensions? See, you're saying,
Right.
what you just said to me was like, oh yeah, they're willing to come to this solution, so it's not an interpretive issue. And for what we have, which is 28 years left, and I'm hearing the tenant saying,
that was our effort to cure their default that will happen in August 17th,
All right.
2023.
2 months ago, y'all told us,
That's all.
negotiate
Right.
this, and
Yeah.
this. And the things that you told us to negotiate did not include an extension.
I agree 100%.
And
We never contemplated an extension at all. That's correct.
Mitch, if I could,
And how,
Whether you choose their numbers or our numbers, it would be less harmful to your position, regardless of choosing their numbers or our numbers to resolve the interpretive dispute and their existing breach, than it is to now tack on this significant benefit that has an operational impact on the airport. Like, that's why I was saying, I'm less concerned about walking you through all the ins and outs of the percentage rent, because the extension is an enormous factor for the airport. It goes to the heart of what y'all do.
So, Mitch, if I could just respond to your last statement, and that is, we don't think any percentage rent would be paid based on our analysis. So by offering 50 grand, that is consideration we think that you never get here if we just follow the lease as drafted. So that's why if he's gonna make a commitment of over $700,000 that we don't think he legally has to make, that's why he wants a commitment for an extension. And on top of that, you will make a commitment to further capital at the first extension in order to have the benefit of the remainder. So you really are getting a lot of benefit, otherwise wouldn't get. And the $15 million offer, from our perspective, is consistent with what happened with the other tenant who committed to 40.
So I see it differently. I see it like you could lose and in an ADR or in court, and then have to pay a lot of money and get nothing for it, no additional space for it, okay, no additional term for it. So if you come up with a plan now, you kind of hedge your bet a little bit. So you can keep your 28 years that you have left, not be in default, move on, build the building, make as much money as you can, and if you have a fixed number and you're super successful, like you said, then, or one of you said, then you can really have your cake and eat it too. Or you could you roll in the dice, literally take your chances with some uncertainty in the process of finding out whether a judge or jury feels you're right or you're wrong. And so that, to me, if I was you, I'd be going, all right, well, I can get some comfort and sleep better at night, maybe knowing something isn't going to blow up on me, or I can take my chances. Depends on how much I really feel. It's like the old Clint Eastwood. How much do you really think?
I increase that language as clear as it can be. I'm happy to commit to arbitration, mediation, you name it.
That's another question. Again, I don't know all the ins and outs, but do the tenants pay property taxes at the airport?
Certain tenants do, that are non-aeronautical, yes. The
Okay.
furniture, the movie theater, et cetera. Yeah.
Okay, so how does that shake out relative to the spreadsheets that were shown to us? Because I know that some don't pay real estate taxes, if I remember correctly. So in your assumptions in building out your spreadsheets, the math may not be entirely accurate relative to what you think you're going to pay or not pay. And I'm just bringing that up so that you guys maybe didn't know that, and you can use that information as you make your decisions.
Can I respond to that part of it?
Yes, sir.
I pay real estate taxes right now on the mattress firm and the restaurant, so it's good.
Okay.
Commercial property has to pay real estate tax. Aeronautical is exempt from real estate tax.
Okay. Would this building be exempt from
No,
real estate taxes? All right.
Because just think of it from a landlord, I can do a gross lease with somebody and treat that differently, because people are used to paying their share of taxes.
The tenant.
No, trust me, as a tenant, I know that.
So I calculated taxes, paying taxes and collecting from taxes.
Okay.
I show it as income, I show it as, which is the way it's put.
Okay. I just want to make sure that.
I thought those were civil.
All right, so.
Okay, so I'm back looking for a motion where I was about an hour ago. How are we gonna resolve this tonight?
Well,
What you wanna do?
so just for my 2 cents, the $15 million commitment, the idea that that's not gonna happen for however many, 28 years? 28 years, to me, that's almost illusory at this point. Like, I don't plan to practice by then. I don't think I don't know any of us in the room that necessarily will be at this table in 28 years. That is very different than the Atlantic Aviation lease. Right. And so that puts a very different complexion in my mind on whether or not we could even bring you a term sheet within 30 days. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but I'm just pointing that out. So I don't want you to operate under the idea that you have a staff recommendation for us to continue going. I'm agnostic. I will work as hard and as long as you tell me to.
Yeah.
You are in a position to say, fish, cut bait, or continue to work, and that's entirely up to you. But it doesn't sound like we're moving down the Atlantic Aviation lease.
Part of it may not be realistic.
Well, I guess I'm back to though now, if the tenant insists on the extension to make this work, and the $15 million is not the sweetener that we thought it was, or enhancement maybe is a better word, that we thought it was originally because it's so far out into the future. All we're walking away with is the annual going from 2 to 3%. So is that enough for us? And, you know, this goes back to staff and council for us to, you know, say we're gonna move ahead with the extension.
Well, and a fixed rate versus trying to calculate. It's
So
also
if you
on the
agree to
table.
3% and we want 3%, you're right, forget about the 15 million
Right.
and all that stuff, take off this. So what this really shakes down to is, because you know you have to get the building done, or rent, something changes on September of next year, we all know it. He knows he's obligated to build it, it's in his contract, it's in his lease. So the question just becomes, are you willing to have a discussion about the rent? And what maybe do, whether it's percentage or whether it's fixed? And can you guys come to some sort of, when I say you guys, it's really us, but can we and you come to a you know, genuine, sincere effort to make it happen in an effort to avoid defaulting you under your lease? And how important is that? And if it's really important, then I would put a ton of effort into that, because I think that it probably wouldn't be a good thing to get a default notice under the lease. I mean, I'm not saying anything that nobody here doesn't know. So if the 3%, if you're okay with that, then where's the starting point? Where's the fixed rent? How do we put that in? The building's going to be built. And then that shows to me like a ton of good faith that we can really make progress with our tenant. And then we can have the second part of the conversation called phase 2. Okay, great. You know, okay, we've shown we can work and put something together. Let's talk about what an extension and an amended and restated lease may look like. But I would separate the two, to your point. I think, right, because 2 months ago with a full slate of people here, which unfortunately 3 of them aren't here, and they can't really be part of our decision, which I don't like that. We decided unanimously to have them go forward and come up with something. And so I'd like to separate the two and say, here's a thought. We give them, I hate to do this again in a way, but we give them 30 days to come up with something. No, not a discussion on the extension, what the terms are gonna be, fixed or whatever, get it worked out, make your decisions. If not, then we're back in 30 days, and at that point, there's just nothing left to talk about.
Okay, but I thought I heard Mr. Hashemi say he will not negotiate under those terms.
Well, that's his business decision to make.
Okay.
Let me, like that. You have to understand, we started from a base of hanging out everything zero. I think what we've done and what we've shown you tonight, I mean, I committed again tonight. If it's not good faith negotiating, I don't know what would be. You know, I started from a basis that I don't owe anything for the next 13 years, I'm percentage, right? I'm up to $50,000. I offered 2%, you said 3%, I went to 3%. You said extension, you gotta give me something for extension, I put $15 million on the table. If that's not good faith, then, you know, if you think that I haven't moved, then if that's not good enough, that's not good faith, then we should stop negotiating.
I think
I mean, because I've stretched out, I'm willing to sit down and hash it out. I hear what you're saying about the, you know, the 5-year, you know, there's rationale for everything. I don't think it's being irrational. You know, I've stretched, and I'm willing to stretch more, but there's a limit to that.
the problem is, this process, it takes, you guys know this, you've been doing this, what you do long enough. This isn't gonna get resolved here right now. It's just gonna take time. So it's not happening, it's sitting here. It's just not.
Well, we either need an extension or we need
I don't think
to,
that can be done in 30 days.
I mean, I'm struggling with the I mean, the extensions is new news to me this week. You know, have we heard this before?
Like,
So,
not till
you
tonight,
know,
because we have new
that's
information.
part of what is, you know, this was already a difficult process that we were going through, and this and to say that that's a deal breaker, I don't think that's, you know, again, something that's come up at what feels like the 11th hour.
Does at least provide for any type of dispute resolution in it?
No, and I will tell you that, in my career, every single time I've ever had an agreement that has, an arbitration provision, I mark that, I strike through that, and we did that in Atlantic, because they are terrible. They are not fun to go through, nobody leaves happy, and I strongly recommend against any kind of binding arbitration. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't employ a mediator, but, to see if we can get to a term sheet, and that's, you know, that's certainly something you can consider, but binding arbitration, which, Mr. Dubasar suggested, oh no, I would never recommend that to any client.
We did propose mediation a couple of months ago. We think it's a good idea to get a third party to help facilitate a resolution, because each side has dug into their viewpoint on what's reasonable or not. And it's an amazing thing when you get the right people to try and break that third parties to conclusion.
Okay, so back to,
a motion, somebody to try to state a motion that might get enough votes.
I'll wing it.
All right, wing it.
Nobody wants to wing it, I'll wing it. Okay, so here's my motion. I move that we, give 30 days for a opportunity for our council and us and their council and Mr. Hashemi's company to come to some solution as to what the rent may be and what the balance of the term will be. All right? I don't want to discuss extensions until I know this part has been resolved. And that's my position on that. And so I would move that we give them the 30 days to resolve it. The second part of that is, if it's not resolved, with spending 30 days in good faith doing it, that we have no choice. Our fiduciary responsibility to move forward and declare a default.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll look for board members, Jean or Cheryl, any comment on that motion?
I have no comment.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Cheryl.
Okay, just a question on the motion. Hasn't it already been stated that Premier will not entertain going forward and determining negotiations without consideration of the 20 years? And if that is the case, then what is the use of this motion? Does understand?
Okay. Well, I would say your point is spot on. That's what we heard. I am choosing, because I see the glass half full, to optimistically reject that position and like to think that Mr. Hashemi and Mr. Dubasar will find a solution with us in the next 30 days. And that's my hope. So it's a motion built on hope. Okay?
You mean that thing left in Pandora's box, right?
That's it. And so
Good.
my hope is runneth outeth in 30 days.
All right, just
as
wanted to
a
be sure I
point-
understood.
Okay.
A point of clarification, so you said, we'd have no choice but to move forward, declare default, it would be declare breach.
Breach.
Okay.
Default breach.
Well, within the lease, those are distinct
Are they?
concepts,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
so it would be breach, not default, nobody's declared default. That's
Okay.
on the table at the
Thank you
moment.
for the clarification.
The second thing is, do you make your motion contingent upon them agreeing to continue to acknowledge that the 30 days is not a waiver of the notice of breach, because that has been part of the last two extensions, and we have received written confirmation from Premier that they understand that the 30 days for negotiation does not waive our right to issue the notice of breach if and when impasse is declared.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Okay, any other comments or questions? Randy, anything else? Okay, it's just the four of us, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? Motion passes, so another 30 days, and try to move closer. Good luck. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right,
Take care. Good luck.
yeah, good luck.
Make it happen.
Appreciate it. Okay, next item, notice abatement operations summary, Robert Abbott, Robert?
Good evening. For you, noise and operations report for the month of May 2022. As you can see, operations at the airport were 7,443, which is 5% over the May of 2021. Gas deliveries were up 5%, and jet fuel deliveries were down 10% from May of last year. We did have 7 households that filed complaints on the hotline and on the web form. Again, most of those came from the restaurant nearby. And we have 1 departure. As you can see, the customs, we had 169 aircraft which cleared customs from, we had 19 different countries at the time. You can see their locations. We had them Norway and
Tahiti.
Tahiti, which was an interesting one.
Tahiti.
It wasn't me.
Wow, yeah.
And then we did have 61 after-hours clearings during the month, and 35 of these were on Tuesday and Wednesday. So that concludes the report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions for Robert? Okay, thank you very much. Next item is Accounting Policy and Procedures Manual. We have a proposal for an amendment, and Jada Stewart, you'll present this item?
Good evening. The amendment before you reflects changes in check signing limits, reflecting our current best practices and are summarized as follows. Checks less than $25,000 would require a signature from the executive director and or the designee or a single authorized member of the Airport Authority Board. Checks greater than $25,000 will require a signature from the executive director or a designee and a single authorized member of the Airport Authority Board. I would also like to point out, on average, the Airport Authority cuts 70 to 80 checks per month. On average, approximately 10 to 16 of these checks require, if not 1, but 2 board signatures. This update to the accounting policy will reduce this number to 5 to 6 checks requiring board signatures per month. As the board is aware, the Secretary Treasurer does review the monthly bank statements for accuracy, and the process of reviewing checks paid by the airport continues through the annual audit season. There will be a continuous level of transparency between the board and staff regarding the airport's finances.
What, is the limit 10 now? 10 and 20?
Yes, 10 for one, for me, or
Right.
one
10,000.
staff,
Right.
and then above 10,000, 1 staff, and 1 board, and then above 20,000, or 20,000 above, 2 boards. Is that correct, Jada?
Yes, that's correct.
This moves it to 25,000.
One threshold, $25,000.
Under 25,000 would require a staff signature, usually mine. In my absence, it's usually Scott. And then above 25 would require mine and a board member.
1 board member instead of...
1 board member.
So how does the designee, how does that work? Do you have to be off for a certain amount of time, and then who can sign besides Scott?
It's 3 of us, because we usually need for our dual redundancy here for most of our processes, it's
Right.
2 people. So if Scott Travis and I. I'm usually the check signer for, all, routinely, but if I'm out, it's Scott, and if Scott's out, it would be Travis. But for the board, it's the 3 officers and then a 4th designee, and that you approve that person. It's usually Mr. Folden because he lives nearby and he's very accessible to us. And part of the challenge is, sometimes, particularly as the checks get bigger with inflation, et cetera, getting 2 board members to be available so that we can pay our vendors timely can sometimes be difficult. As Jada mentioned, this change in our accounting procedures was developed with our internal auditor, who is Carolyn Bender, CPA, and she works with other special districts. In fact, she's a CPA for the Florida Association of Special Districts. So this is consistent with other organizations, and it was also reviewed by our external auditor, BRAA, whom you heard from last month.
Not only, when you say it's consistent with other organizations, not only the dollar amount, but the number of signers as well?
Correct. According to our external auditor, the practice of having a second person sign is a good one, but it's not necessarily a required one. We just prefer to have that because, again, some of the checks, particularly when we're talking about some of the contracts, the construction checks can get kind of large. So it's really important that, from a staff perspective, that there are board members at the officer level or the designee who have line of sight into those. But again, the bank statements are reviewed monthly with the Secretary Treasurer, and the auditor also reviews our checks. They'll do random check pulls, right, Jada, during the audit to make sure that we're following our established procedures.
Motion to approve.
Second. Okay, second. Any other questions? This is resolution number 6/14/22. It was in our board packet. Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, next item, thank you, Jada. Next item is public transportation grant agreement. Robert, you're gonna handle that? Robert, yep.
Sure. So the Florida Department of Transportation has offered a public transportation grant agreement for the air traffic control tower radio communication electronic upgrade construction. So this is a construction portion of the design project that's currently ongoing and just about finishing up here. The project is for $400,000 budget for that, and the PGA is for 80% of that amount, which will be $320,000. The Airport Authority's share is 20%, and that's about $80,000. So, Airport Management recommends the approval of resolution number 061522, authorizing public transportation grant agreement with the State of Florida Department of Transportation for ATCC radio communication and electronic upgrade construction.
Motion.
Mitch, second?
Second, but I do have a question.
Okay.
I mean, this is basically just an upgrade to the latest and greatest technology and...
Yes, sir. It's improving the radios, antenna, all the infrastructure, the communication of the tower.
And how old is all that equipment now? It came with the
It's
tower?
going on 20 years. It came
Yeah.
In some cases, right?
The last project was 2006, and then there were some additional equipment installed in 2009. Some of that equipment's been replaced over time just because of wear and tear and lightning strikes, but it is past its useful life.
15 years, yeah.
And it's difficult, as you can imagine, to obtain parts on some of this equipment that can be archaic.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, resolution 6/15/22 passes. Next item is another public transportation grant. Robert, you're gonna do this one?
Yes, so the Florida Department of Transportation has offered an amendment to the public transportation grant agreement for security enhancements for the port. The original grant amount was for $750,000, and that is being revised to $1.3 million to account for some increased costs, mainly due to the materials and labor that we've seen lately. So FDOT has offered the 80% of the eligible costs, and that was at $600,000, and now it's going to be an additional $440,000, which will bring their share to $1,040,000. And the Airport Authority's provided share will be $260,000. So with that, airport management does recommend the approval of resolution number 061622, authorizing an amendment to the public transportation grant agreement with the State of Florida Department of Transportation for security enhancements phase 4.
Got it. Do I have a motion to approve, resolution 61622 in our board packet?
So moved.
Okay, Bob, second. All right, Mitch. Any questions on this one then, for Robert? This is geared more toward the security instead of communication, so I think that's obvious. So, okay. Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Robert. Okay, next item, E, is Corporate Identity and Community Engagement Program update, and Claire Bennett is going to report on that. Claire?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's been our practice over the last several years since we formally established this program to provide you with quarterly updates and give you an idea of what our community engagement program has resulted in. So bear with me, Vanessa's not here today, so some of the website stuff's not in my wheelhouse, but I will get through it. So what Vanessa's reporting here is that our traffic remained fairly consistent. We did have a spike in March and one in April. We can't really attribute the spike in March, but it looks like the April spike is due to the proclamation that we received from the city. Mr. Chairman, you were there with me, and this was for General Aviation Month. So the mayor was very gracious in the city to present that to us in April. With regard to the remaining social media analytics, I think what I know here is that we did gain an audience of 150 in the last quarter. While we did lose some folks from Twitter, we did gain quite a few on the Instagram. So that's very, I think, nice. I don't do any of those myself, but those were great things, and Vanessa does a great job with maintaining those social media posts current. In terms of which ones that we did over the last quarter generated the most interest, of course, we had the West Boca High School students here in May. That I'll show you a video real quick on that we put together of that event. We had quite a bit, as you can see, of interest on that, as well as our honoring of Mel back in March for his birthday. That was a great evening for all of us here, and we did receive quite a bit of attention. And then the rubber removal post, that people like to see some of the improvements that we do and how the airport is continuously beautifying. We did quite a few press releases, mostly centered around the $40 million upgrade program that we signed with Atlantic Aviation, the West Boca High School students coming here, as well as the event that we did with Boca Helping Hands. Those are always great events that people really hang on, and you can see here, these are representative of some of the publications that picked up the press releases. Well, we continue to be very active in different events through either speaking engagements or participation. Of course, Habitat for Humanity is always one that we particularly enjoy because we get out there and get sweaty and do physical things. But we also have participated, this is Scott, at the Construction Management Conference in
Planning, Design, and Construction Consortium for Airports Council International and AAA.
In March, right. And you can see some of the other events that we attended. Several of these are related to certifications. For example, Christine's with the Florida Records Management, is a certified public records manager. So I might need you to click there, Scott. This is the video that we put together with PACE, our marketing firm, for the West Boca High School visit. They have to go out to use it.
Volume.